I think the awareness that there are LaRouches on the ballot is out there. Do the people really know who they are yet? That's the question.
They are running on the Democratic ballot in the March 15th Illinois primary, but mainstream Democrats want no part of them. Who are these candidates who support Lyndon LaRouche, and what do they stand for? Good evening, I'm John Calloway, and welcome to Chicago Tonight. One of the cliches of American political life is that this country is great because it invites people of many different political persuasions to participate in the Democratic elections. The fact historically is that mainstream political parties have often made it very difficult for minority parties even to get on the ballot, much less win a general election. But few so-called minority parties have created more discomfort to mainstreamers in recent years than those who call themselves supporters of Lyndon LaRouche, the longtime presidential candidate who recently served part of a prison sentence for mail fraud. Tonight we'll talk with LaRouche supporters who are running for state constitutional office in Illinois and for Congress. First, this report from Chicago Tonight correspondent Phil Ponce on why mainstream Democrats are so worried about the LaRouche supporters.
Hello. State Democratic Party Chairman Gary Lapel is spending a lot of time on the phone with his troops throughout Illinois.
I'm calling about these LaRouche candidates. Down in Palos, which is your township, you've got a LaRouche running for Congress against the regular Democrat candidate.
All total, there are 21 LaRouche candidates, led by gubernatorial candidate Sheila Jones, running as Democrats in the primary. 5 are running for statewide office, 2 for Congress, and another 14 for the Democratic State Central Committee.
I have not had a nice restful night for the last month to 6 weeks because I saw what happened in 1986.
That's when LaRouche candidate Mark Fairchild won the Democratic nomination for lieutenant governor, and another LaRouche follower, Janice Hart, won the Democratic nomination for Secretary of State.
And we're going to roll our tanks down State Street, and we're going to make sure that every citizen is armed with reason and with beauty.
But the Democratic nominee for governor said the tanks would have to roll without him.
I will not serve on a ticket with candidates who espouse the hate-filled folly of Lyndon LaRouche.
LaRouche, who was recently paroled after serving 5 years on a federal fraud charge, is described as a right-wing extremist. Democrats say his followers, like Sheila Jones, subscribe to LaRouche's extreme beliefs, like one which claims the Jewish Anti-Defamation League runs the Ku Klux Klan and Nazi groups in the United States. Jones and other LaRouche supporters are accused of believing in conspiracies involving, among others, the CIA, Henry Kissinger, the KGB, and the International Monetary Fund.
I think the awareness that there are LaRouches on the ballot is out there. In 1986, the party really dropped the ball. We didn't do sample ballots, we didn't do interviews like this, and we really didn't do anything.
This time around, though, the regular Democrats have printed 1.2 million sample ballots to warn people who's who. And they're mailing out 150,000 of these brochures to homes in targeted districts. And they're taking to the radio waves.
They're back. They're back. Disciples of extremist Lyndon LaRouche are running again as Democrats in next Tuesday's Illinois primary election.
I think what they've been doing has been so hysterical, I guess they're more than nervous. Because I've never seen anything as hysterical as the kind of reaction since we filed our petitions that they've had.
Rob Hart is the campaign organizer for LaRouche candidate for governor Sheila Jones. He rejects the accusation that the LaRouche team is masquerading as Democrats.
In the Democratic Party bylaws, national bylaws, it states that the principle of it is to be completely wide open to anybody of any view, any background, any creed, any religion, anything.
And the LaRouche candidates are fighting back. They plan to pass out 250,000 copies of these flyers, and their literature predicts a replay of 1986. Democrats, meanwhile, are issuing a warning.
Don't play the name game. Don't do the eeny, meeny, miny, mo, as our radio commercial says. Is just, if you're in the race for comptroller and you've never heard of the names and you don't know what they stand for, don't say, oh, well, I think this name sounds nice, I'll vote for that person. Just go on to the next race.
The LaRouche candidates say they're happy to be identified. They claim the more the public knows about them, the more votes they'll get. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce.
And now joining us are Anthony Harper, a supporter of Lyndon LaRouche, who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for Lieutenant Governor of Illinois. Sheila Jones, a supporter of Lyndon LaRouche, who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for Governor of Illinois. Rosemarie Love, a Lyndon LaRouche supporter who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for Secretary of State. And John McCarthy, a Lyndon LaRouche supporter who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for Congressman from Illinois' 5th District. That's a seat now held by Congressman Dan Rostenkowski. Welcome all to Chicago Tonight. Ms. Jones, start off, and then the rest of you can kind of chime in. Give us a little thumbnail sketch of who you are, where you grew up, went to school, and what your daytime job is.
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin. I was born in Chicago. I am a child of the Martin Luther King movement. I was a leader of that during the open housing marches. I went on to become a school teacher, graduated from Catholic school, college in Milwaukee, music teacher, and minor in voice and piano. And then went on to be a trade union organizer and as a political figure fighting for classical education and for the civil rights movement to be broadened. I met, in the midst of my campaign against drugs in the late 1970s, Mr. Lyndon H. LaRouche.
And what happened when you met him?
Oh, boy. He had a book that was just commissioned called Dope Incorporated, about that thick. And it went through the whole history of the international drug trade, but also who runs it and named the names. And I said, my God, someone with that kind of courage can only be reminiscent, and was to me, of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I joined.
And did you make any independent verification of the allegations in that book?
I tried my best to prove that it wasn't true. I couldn't believe that there was, an actual deliberate program for drugs. And when I found myself exhausted to prove that it was the case, that this was a tremendous operation to create a drug rock sex counterculture to destroy our future generation, I had nothing to do. As my mother said, when you meet truth, you don't get a popular opinion poll, act.
So as we come back through later in this program this evening, as you discuss education or job creation or anything, would that be the kind of central theme that would inform your views?
What would inform my views, yes, that, and as it relates to how to get back to traditional values of the Democratic Party for industrialization. This is critical.
Mr. McCarthy, tell us about your upbringing, where you were born. Tell us a little about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm from Chicago. I went to St. Symphoros Grammar School and Marist High School. I met the LaRouche organization while I was in high school, and I've been a full-time organizer with the LaRouche movement ever since.
How old were you?
15.
And when you were 15 years old, what was it that, was there something specific that really attracted you to the org? Something they said that really rang a bell with you?
It's not so much what they said at first, but it's what I was on many mailing lists because I was searching for the truth to base my life around an idea. So I was on religious mailing lists, left-wing mailing lists, right-wing mailing lists, and I noticed the one thing that they all had in common is they were all attacking Mr. LaRouche. Groups that were supposed to be total enemies of each other were united in saying that this man was dangerous. So from my understanding of the gospel, I knew that if somebody is coming under that kind of a vicious attack, that you better take a look at what they're saying because they're probably saying something true. And what attracted me, that's what got me to look at the LaRouche movement, what got me to stay with it, is the way that Mr. LaRouche differentiated between the British system and the American system, which coming from an Irish Catholic background is something that I know about, where how the British go out of their way to keep people down, all right, to deny knowledge. And the American system is to spread knowledge and technology all over. Now, that might sound strange today because since the Kennedy assassination, we really haven't stood for that. But that is our national mission. That's what we were founded, and that's what the LaRouche movement is attempting to bring back.
So there, how many years ago was this then that you...
14 years. 14
years ago. And have you been a paid staff person during those years?
Yes.
All right. Now and you want to say anything more about your education?
I've learned a lot more in the LaRouche movement than I did.
So it's been in the LaRouche movement?
Yes.
All right, now let's go over to Anthony Harper. Tell us a little about yourself.
I'm also a Chicago resident. I've been here, you know, all of my life. I've worked with several grassroots community organizations, have formed a couple myself.
Where'd you grow up?
On the west side,
On
predominantly.
the west side?
Right, but I lived all over the city.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to several schools.
Well, give me a couple of schools.
Skinner School on the west side, Gladstone Crane High School, and I played football in high school. I was a boxer in the Catholic Youth Organization program.
Tell him your name.
Tony TNT Harper.
Tony TNT Harper.
Yes, that's
Glad to see you, Mr. TNT.
And how I got involved with the organization, working with different groups such as the Nation of Islam and various groups like that, getting a feel for history. I read some information on the African slave trade, and we tend to generalize what happened. Black Americans as well as whites, well, it's the white people and it's such and such. No, in reading that information, I found out exactly the networks and how it was pulled off and who was involved. And I think that if people got that kind of information, we would not have so much racial animosity as it exists today.
But what was your connection? How did you first make your connection with the teachings of Mr. LaRouche?
Reading the literature. For a long time, reading the literature.
How old were you?
It was about 5 years ago. I'll be 34 this Thursday.
Oh, happy birthday.
So,
All right, so we'll come back to some of your thoughts on the teachings of Mr. LaRouche. Let's go over to Rosemarie Love and ask you to tell us something about yourself.
Well, I'm a native Chicagoan. I was born here. And, of course, I went to school here to the Washington Irving Elementary School and the McKinley High School. I graduated. I attended Herzl Junior College, also the University of Illinois, as well as...
Was that at Champaign-Urbana?
No.
Circle?
Circle campus.
Then called Circle?
In the evening, right. And Chicago, campus there, and Governor State University. And, of course, during one of our heating sessions, during the county board hearings.
Now, you were a member of the Cook County Board of Commissioners.
Right.
What years were those?
From 86 to 90.
What was your political experience before that?
Solid Democrat.
Would you be what would be known as an organization Democrat?
Right.
What organization? Who did you work with closely?
Okay, I originally came into politics through the 22nd Ward under Otto Janosek. And then, of course, every 10 years they redistrict. And then I became in the 24th Ward under, I believe it was George Collins and Congressman Collins, then Walter Shumpert. And, of course...
This is West Side Chicago.
West Side Chicago. I'm a native West Side.
Right, so then you get to the county board.
I get to the county board.
Now, what happens that connects you with the LaRouche philosophy?
I'm a prolific reader, and we were having a problem on the county board about whether or not they should terminate a physician who was found to have had the AIDS. And I met Miss Sheila Jones, and she introduced me to some of the material from the LaRouche organization. And I began to read the organization literature, and then I noticed that the predictions that had been made by Lyndon LaRouche, every last one of them became true, and they made sense.
On the issue of AIDS?
Not only AIDS,
I was going to say, but then did you find other things that you found compatible with your thinking?
Economics, and also geopolitical issues.
But it started with his views on AIDS and your experience coming out of that issue.
Right, and my feeling about the AIDS virus. I felt that this particular physician, if he had AIDS, and he was in a condition to where somebody had to lead him to work, that he should not be attending patients just because the patients were poor.
And Mr. LaRouche's view is that that person should be identified and dealt with in the way that persons, say, with tuberculosis would be identified.
That's right.
Now, Ms. Jones, let me begin, and anybody that wants to chime in on this, feel free to. What do you say to those persons who say, you're entitled to your views, and maybe some of us agree with you on this and disagree with you on the other, but why do you call yourself Democrats? Why don't you say form the LaRouche party as opposed to, what makes you a Democrat?
Democrat because this is the United States of America, And I personally, and mostly all of us, have been Democrats all our lives. And John, whose family is relative to the Democratic Party, Rosemarie, as you know, Tony. But the question on the table, what I say to people is the following. In 1964, you might remember the case of Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
Atlantic City.
Exactly. And the fact that the Democratic good old boys, the white supremacists of the Citizens Council, who wanted to make the party a private good old boys club, said, no, blacks will not be allowed into this party. And Fannie Lou, as you know, had to go on and was not, the party was not allowed to be seated except 2 seats and so forth. It is exactly, John, the same situation. You know, we didn't go through civil rights. Martin Luther King did not, and Reverend James Bevel did not fight for the right for inclusion, the right to vote, the right to be identified as participants in this political system. To find the party today doing exactly the same thing to people they view, as some have said, scum, and so forth, because of our wishes.
But help me with this.
Yes.
How do you then, are the journalists who call LaRouche extreme right-wing, is that a profoundly inaccurate statement given what you're talking about in terms of civil rights?
But specifically, you got to know where this came from. It came from the ID format computers of the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith, which is not a Jewish organization. They are a spy network and so forth, tied to a lot of things. But it got really hot in 1983, March 23rd, when Ronald Reagan went on nationwide TV and announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, the SDI, or as the media called Star Wars. Why? Because Ronald Reagan invited Mr. LaRouche to help negotiate putting the Strategic Defense Initiative on the table. And as a result of that opening, the neoconservatives of both parties and the Anti-Defamation League went bananas about the fact that Reagan brought us in and went on public TV and declared the Strategic Defense Initiative national policy, and everyone knew in the boardrooms this was LaRouche. So the extremist thing came out as a function of trying to distance the population and the president and any president from that point on from having access to the wealth of knowledge that Mrs. Rosemarie Love mentioned.
Let me shock you. Many of your journalists are ignorant when it comes to doing research and knowledge, because at the time that they should be devoting to that, they're sitting around in bars or in little cliques, drinking, bending elbows, and they're assuming that they know what they're talking about. Because if they were well read, then they would understand. And they would
You heard it first on this program that journalists sit around bars drinking. All right, we're finally getting something constructive said on this program and bending the elbow. But now, let's go, because we're talking with candidates here who are Lyndon LaRouche supporters who are running in the Democratic primary race on March 15th. Ms. Jones, I'll go back to you since you're the candidate for governor. Anybody else chime in that wants to. Clearly in this state, the way we finance education, the quality of education is a paramount concern for those of you running for state constitutional office. What is it that you would do to improve the quality of education? Would you do anything to change the financing of it?
Well, let's go with the financing first of all. Everybody knows that the whole lottery system is a debacle, that none of it gets there. What we would do, and we propose very simply, and we've been proposing it since 1983 here in Illinois, is to put a corset, a girdle around the necks of the speculating bubble, the derivative bubbles at the Board of Trade, to tax it. We want a transactional tax of now 1/10 of 1% of what goes down at the derivatives markets.
What would that raise,
This
do you
would
think?
bring about, in the state of Illinois, just transact. Remember, they're not taxed. They turn over $12 trillion a day with their laptop desk and computers and what have you. Something in the order of $6 to $10 billion new monies into the coffers of Illinois. Having said that, and that's an important point.
But what do you say to those in the trading who say that with international trading, if you impose a tax like that in a place like Chicago, it'll be fine, we'll simply go to London or Tokyo, that the business will dry up. They've been fighting that, not only against you, but against everybody else that's proposed it.
They won't. They have nowhere to go because, see, the whole point
No, they're not saying that they won't. They're saying that their business will dry up and that the people who trade, all you do is you do it on the computer these days.
Internationally, it's a big story because Mr. LaRouche has proposed this. It's been seconded by, right now in Paris, Maurice Allais. internationally, Japan is now looking at these derivative instruments, there are thousands of them, and it's
So
out
you're
of
saying you would
control.
try and do it on a global basis so to even it out so you wouldn't pick on Chicago.
Exactly. But you'd started here, I mean, from here. It's necessary because this usury
All right,
is eluding.
let's cut through. Now you've got the money. What do you do with it?
Now, then what we would do is we begin to, with that kind of an operation, you can then go after the post-industrial downsizing of education, known as these outcome-based education reforms or mastery learning we once had, but all of this crazy stuff which has moved us away from cognitive education into associative. We want to bring back classical education.
Basic stuff?
Basic, not reading, writing, or arithmetic. I mean, literally, geometry. Now, to me, and I say this as personal, the fact that we shut down our music programs in our schools, I'll tell you, we have paid for that one a long time because you don't have children able to understand that their minds are critical to solve the problems facing this country. So we need to get real teachers back. I'm going to be calling in a lot of retired teachers of 70s and 60s to come back in order to remember and bring back the basic sciences into our education.
Mr. McCarthy, let me just go to you for a question that we put to some other opponents of Dan Rostenkowski on a program last week. Mr. Rostenkowski declined to be with us, other opponents. And that is, what do you say to the voter who says, I'm torn between voting for Rostenkowski again, who has, according to the press again, all of that power to help Clinton with this, that, or the other, be it health care, welfare reform, or they say his role in NAFTA, and the notion of those who are saying, no, it's time for new blood, I don't like all the dealing he's done, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you come down on that?
Well, I think I would represent a lot more power than Mr. Rostenkowski. In this play that we made the centerpiece of our campaign, Through the Years, written by Amelia Robinson, I played a abolitionist, somebody who helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad. And that's essentially what we're doing with our campaign, is freeing the slaves, and I don't mean the American people, I mean the elected officials. Because you would be shocked how many congressmen are meeting with LaRouche representatives behind closed doors and agree with us on things like nationalizing the Federal Reserve or taking down the statue of Ku Klux Klan founder Albert Pike that our tax dollars are paying for right now. Tear that down. They agree with us, but they are terrified of the Anti-Defamation League, which uses all kinds of pressure, legal and illegal, to make people do and say very degrading things. Now, at all the candidates' events that we've been going to, the other candidates have been grabbing up this little book like hotcakes. And if there was a strong vote for LaRouche candidates, like in 1986, that would give courage to most of the people who are in Congress right now, who are good people. I mean, there's some very evil people there.
Mr. Harper, I'm going to go over and put a question to you, which I assume you or Ms. Jones could handle, but that I assume that you're together on, and that is that the other issue, at least identified by politicians and by a lot of people in this campaign, is the issue of crime, the need for reduction of crime, gangs, narcotics trafficking, etc. What would you do as a part of the Jones administration to deal with that?
Well, first of all, Sheila put it very well when she talked about the expose on drugs, international, national drug trade. There first has to be an acknowledgement of where the problem is coming from. And on the issue of crime, you have to deal with it from a holistic perspective, meaning cause and effect. And we're not dealing with it like that. Our institutions, elected officials and so forth, are not looking at it from that standpoint. We're looking at it from a standpoint of people are worthless, they're criminals, we got to warehouse them or whatever. Reform the human being. Give the human being the dignity and the self-esteem, and
then the rest will take care of itself, you're saying. On that note, our many thanks to Sheila Jones, Anthony Harper, Rosemarie Love, and John McCarthy for being with us. If you've been hearing nightmare stories about problems of mail delivery in Chicago, you'll want to be with us tomorrow at 7 and midnight when my colleague Phil Ponce hosts a Chicago examination, a Chicago Tonight examination of the question, what does it take to get the Chicago Post Office to deliver? I'm John Calloway. Thank you and good night. You wanted to add a word as well.
I want to add a word on the crime business. When I become the Secretary of State Police will be joined in the fight against narcotics, such as the big trucks that come into our highways and so forth. They would be used as law enforcement officers rather than as they are now, picking up political contributions.
Tuesday on Channel 11, Mary Kay Slowakowski is back with a new motivational message. Live your life's music.
If I'm productive and I'm accomplishing and I'm achieving,